This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
The Red Apple Media Podcast Network presents This is Protecting America. Now, here's Emmy-winning journalist Rita Cosby.
And welcome to another edition of Protecting America. I'm Rita Cosby. A stunning new report shows how easily terrorists and others are sneaking into the U.S. via our open borders, posing an enormous security risk to our homeland. And joining us now to talk about this and so much more is the journalist who broke that story and many more along the border, an area that she knows all too well, Texas reporter for the New York Post, Jennie Taer. Jennie, great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Rita.
So how wide open is especially our southern border, and how dangerous is it, especially when we hear about these terrorists and others seeping through?
Well, right. I think a lot of people have thought, well, the people that are being caught and released, at least they're being quote unquote vetted. But when speaking with agents, I mean, honestly, for years about this now, the situation is not as it appears. And when the administration and when Eric Adams and when other people say, well, we can at least be assured that people are vetted, the reality is that, yes, they are run through some checks. What those checks show is if someone has been known to have committed a crime in the United States, they would be known. If that person had a check run through that came back within 72 hours, which is pretty hard to do because people have to be released very quickly. So if the foreign government is adversarial, if the foreign government isn't going to respond within that time frame, then you're going to have problems getting information, and thus you're releasing people pretty blindly without really knowing anything. And we've had instances of individuals who are criminals, who are murderers, who are on the terror watch list, who are terrorist members, who have been bomb manufacturers who have made it into our country. And luckily we've, heard about some success stories of ICE being able to go out and get them, but they've been in the country for often years and months. So it's still a very big concern. And Border Patrol agents that I speak to want people to know that, because they want to know that this is not something that they're wanting to be doing, but these are the orders that they're getting from this administration, and it's just making their lives so hard. And that's another reason why morale tanks within the agency, is because people feel responsible for a huge national security risk to the country.
Talk about some of maybe the examples of who has gotten through. You've written about, I think it was a Colombian murderer. There was a Somali terrorist. Talk about some of the ones that you know of, some of the specific cases.
Okay, so in March 2023, we had a man come across the southern border into California. He was apprehended by Border Patrol. He was deemed a, quote, mismatch on the terror watch list and released into the United States. About almost a year later, ICE went through his case and determined that he was not, in fact, a mismatch on the terror watch list. He was, in fact, a member of Al-Shabaab, the Somali terror organization. He had already made his way to Minnesota. And in that example, they also found that he was pretty involved with the terrorist organization as a bomb manufacturer. And so that's just one example of one person. That person, however, was allowed into the country for almost a year, like I said. And on top of that, there's still a lot of questions I have as a reporter, and I know others have had. I know that members of Congress have written letters about this and requested more information from this administration about it. But, how did someone like that get from California to Minnesota? Did he fly on a commercial flight with you or I or one of your listeners? Did this person get any aid from any organizations? What was his past in the United States? Who did he interact with? And so there's a lot of lingering questions we have. Also, Somalia likely won't be as cooperative as other governments with the United States. Are we able to remove him? Are we able to ensure that he doesn't maintain contact here, to ensure that he remains imprisoned in another country? Those are a lot of other factors at play here that, we need to ask and press the government about as, these kinds of stories unfold. It's not just, that they're nabbed after being here for months or years, like I said, but it's what's happened within that time and after.
Where are most of them coming from where they're hitting that terrorist watch list, or is it a whole bunch of different countries?
Right. So this is something that a lot of us have had questions about, right? And it's not really disclosed by the government, by the federal government. Now, the numbers of people are, but their nationalities, their ties, none of that is really public to us. And it's actually something that Fox News had sent a Freedom of Information Act request about and got completely stonewalled by the federal government. And I know there's been a lot of pressure since they've come out and said that, we're not getting answers, and the administration is trying to say that we have no right to this information, but it's not revealing anyone's names or anything. I mean, truly, it's just to find out, where are most of these people coming from, and how can we look at the current trends in migration and relate it to that, and how can we, give the whole story with all this without that information. It's been very hard, but personally, I've seen cases of people from, like I mentioned, Somalia, Colombia. You have people who are affiliated with FARC. We've seen some cases of that in the last couple of years. That's pretty typical when someone comes across the watch list, from what I've heard from Border Patrol agents. We've also seen a man who came across the southern border and said he was Hezbollah and here to make a bomb. That story, involved a man who came into El Paso. He was apprehended, and when he was in the Border Patrol facility, he told the health personnel when they asked him, why'd you come to the U.S. from, all the way from Lebanon? Oh, well, I'm here to make a bomb. And that's when, the alerts went off. But had he not said something, it might have been the case where someone like that would have been released too. So we just don't have enough information on the entire scope of this to really tell that story. And that's one of the big issues here.
I'm Cindy Lauper. My psoriasis was all over, even on my scalp, which may mean 4 times the risk for psoriatic arthritis. But Cosentyx works on both.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis 300 milligram dose and adults with active psoriatic arthritis 150 milligram dose. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at Cosentyx.com or 1-844-COSENTYX. Ask your doctor about Cosentyx.
Choosing a bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drink that's all flavor and just 100 calories? Easy. Choosing between creamy vanilla, double chocolate, and sea salt caramel flavors? A little harder. Try the delicious new Starbucks Frappuccino light drinks. Look for them wherever you buy groceries. Start with Starbucks coffee.
Americans love using their credit cards, the most secure and hassle-free way to pay. But D.C. politicians want to change that with the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. This bill lets corporate megastores pick how your credit card is processed, allowing them to use untested payment networks that jeopardize your data security and rewards. Corporate megastores will make more money, and you pay the price. Tell Congress to guard your card, because Americans lose when politicians choose. Learn more at guardyourcard.com.
You know, you talked about that guy. I remember when that story happened. Did it turn out that he really was from Hezbollah? I mean, that's amazing that he actually said it. And just like you said, imagine if he didn't profess that. Did he turn out to legitimately be a member of Hezbollah? Do we know?
Well, we confirmed that he was actually, yes, in fact, on the terror watch list. And that was later confirmed a few days later after he made that admission. So, again, had he not done that, let's say the custody numbers were high. Let's say ICE couldn't take him into custody just based solely on his nationality, that they wanted to, further question him before any admission was made. He could have been released. I've talked to a number of people, and it's obviously we know of examples now of people who have been released, who are foreign fugitives, who maybe murdered someone in their home country. And that information didn't come back when we contacted a consulate and said, hey, we have this person in custody. Can you run their name? And at the same time, too, you also have people coming across that are dumping their IDs along the border. So are they just, in the words of Todd Bensman at Center for Immigration Studies, are they just saying they're Mickey Mouse at the border? And then, Border Patrol has to take them at their word. And that is true. They do have to take them at their word unless there is some record within the United States with their biometrics that comes up. So it's a very limited scope of checks that's done.
What about also, weren't there some Jordanians recently who bum rushed, it looked like Quantico, the headquarters, and it turned out that they may have had some connections on the terrorist watch list?
Yeah, so that's another interesting story that I wish got more attention because it is a huge deal. You had two individuals that were apparently saying they were Amazon drivers making a delivery at Quantico. And these two were Jordanian nationals. And after this incident, after one, they tried to do that, but also didn't follow the orders not to go through into Quantico. And they had to deploy these extra vehicle barriers because they tried to drive through. Then ICE takes these two guys into custody. But unfortunately, we can't get any more answers on this case. Who are these guys? What is their immigration history? How did they come here? Were they here legally? Was there someone that was snuck through the country, got in as a got-away? Was someone on a student visa? What were the checks that were done, if any, to know who these people are and what's going to be done from here? We just don't have a full idea about this case. And there have been a lot of incidents like this, Chinese nationals that are going on to military bases, posing as tourists, getting arrested either by Border Patrol or ICE after the fact. I mean, that should raise a lot of alarms for all of us. And I think that, there are more instances that we just haven't heard about because I know I've talked to officials at ICE that tell me that there are times where they've had to deploy their manpower to military bases when something like this happens because there are foreigners trying to make entries on them. So we just don't have enough information about this case, and it's been a story that I think should get more attention, and I think a lot of us should be calling on the federal government to release more information about this, to be transparent about any other instances like this. Were these people on the watch list? ICE won't say yes or no, and that's a very alarming thing right now.
Yeah, that is. The other thing is also Chinese. There's been this enormous, as you know, influx of Chinese nationals, well-dressed military-age men crossing the border. You don't just leave China, so you have to wonder, what are they up to? And there's been reports. We've had Gordon Chang, who I'm sure you know, great China expert, who's talked about they're doing some sort of training in the U.S., not for the United States, but against the United States. I mean, there's some scary things out there. What are you hearing about all these Chinese nationals that seem to be crossing at a record pace?
Right. Yeah, they are crossing at a record pace. And I recently was in the San Diego sector of our southern border, which is where they are crossing in large numbers. That's where they're choosing to go typically, to this very remote area called Jacumba Hot Springs out in the middle of nowhere, basically, crossing through the mountains to get there and then staying at an encampment, a makeshift encampment where migrants are lighting fires and sleeping in tents, waiting for Border Patrol, which they're overwhelmed right now, to take them into custody. Those individuals, I spoke to some of them. Of course, it's a little bit hard with language barriers, but through a translation app, speaking with them, they really don't seem to give a reason to be here that would qualify for asylum, just from the ones I've talked to. This is from my experience, but they just have not given any, there's no threats to them in their country. I always ask, did you have problems in your country? Did you have threats against you? Anything like that? No, there's never any. No, I always get no.
They don't even make it up. In other words, they don't even make it up.
No, and they also, come this far. They come with a lot of money often. They've spent a lot of money to come here. Obviously, they have to take multiple flights to get here. They have to pay smugglers. They utilize social media to find their way. But Chinese, if you're someone coming from China, you're going to pay more than someone, let's say, from Guatemala to get here. And so that's another element to this, because as we know, China has the opportunities for young Chinese, people right now are not great. The economic opportunities, you would think would be a driver as well, but that never comes up either. And recently, one of them I spoke with just said they were here solely to visit relatives, but it was alarming to me that they took that dangerous trek and, that expensive trek to just go and fly to Florida to see some family members. So there's a lot of questions we have. And unfortunately, the Biden administration cut the number of vetting questions for Chinese migrants that Border Patrol should ask. And so that's another layer to this story of, well, what is being done for this specific group? Because when trends happen like this, when you start to see a large number of people coming from one area of the world, that usually sets off alarms within the Department of Homeland Security. And in this case, there's not much being done to follow up on that.
You've been talking a bit about the southern border. And what about the northern border? You just did another blockbuster story, Jenny, where you talked about the crossings at a record pace, shattering last year's record at the U.S.-Canada border. What's happening there?
Well, right. This is another concern here, is that we have the largest shared land border in the world that is less manned than the southern border. We have less Border Patrol agents up there. We have no wall up there. It's very remote. And you have, this huge surge there. So last fiscal year, we had about 10,000 illegal crossings. Well, we're already up to that. And the fiscal year, ends in September. So we still have months to go. We have 5 months remaining in this fiscal year. We're going to surpass that record. And I think, there's a lot of stories that we've been able to put together on the northern border and share, because we've talked to people up there who feel just completely isolated from, this issue, from being able to share what they're experiencing. And the focus has been on the southern border, justifiably so, but these people are also dealing with people coming through their properties, just like any rancher in Texas. They're seeing this too. They're arming themselves because they don't know who these people are. They don't want their children to be outside at certain hours. They want a secure home. They have a quiet life, in rural Vermont or in rural New York. And this is just something that's completely shaken them. It's also not people, you would think. It's not people from, let's say, Canada or somewhere that's easy to get to from there. I mean, we're seeing people from Mexico. We're seeing people from Haiti. We're seeing people from across the globe as well there, too. You also see people that go north into Canada through that border, and those people are sometimes the folks that have crossed the southern border illegally and are just ditching their entire process here in the United States. They're just skipping out on it. So that's another layer to this. And, the Border Patrol agents there also have to deal with what's happening at the U.S.-Mexico border. when things get really intense down there, sometimes they've been deployed physically down there, and sometimes they've actually been sent back to their offices away from the front lines to virtually process migrants on basically a Zoom call.
Wow.
So they'll talk to the ones that are at the southern border, and they'll try to help ease the burden on their counterparts down there. So it's a multi-layered issue going on.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
That's incredible. And the numbers, as you know, really are stunning. Like I just saw a recent report, and I know you know this all too well, that the number of gotaways under this current president, President Biden, is more than the last two presidents combined. So when you sit there and you say that is a stunning amount, and they are overrun, they're overwhelmed, the border agents. This is still at a historic pace.
Absolutely. And we also often neglect to think about, not just the 7 million that have been encountered crossing illegally, not only the 1.7 million gotaways, which you just mentioned, but also 600,000, 400,000. Those two numbers are people who have come either through the parole process, Biden administration letting people fly directly from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And then the folks using this phone app, CBP1, to cross from Mexico through ports of entry. So the numbers are even broader than what we all think. And of course, people who aren't caught on sensors, we know the gotaways are a certain number, but we also don't know what we don't know. And they're able to count that through sensors along the southern border. But if someone avoids the sensor, or if that sensor is off or unmanned or whatever it is, there are many circumstances at play here, then, this number is likely much larger than we think.
You just wrote another column, Jennie, and I want to make sure I touch on this before we go, about migrants crossing the border, rushing the border in case Biden loses in November. Some brothers, it was a group of Colombian brothers, Ricardo, 20, Sebastian, 18, spoke with you and your team. Tell us sort of what they said and what seems to be the trend that's happening, that these migrants are sort of bum rushing the border because they think they have a narrow window.
Right. So we spoke at a migrant NGO where they had been dropped off by Border Patrol, and they were then waiting for a bus from that NGO in Yuma. They were going to go to Phoenix to catch a flight from the airport there to New Jersey. So these two brothers were talking with me, and I was just having a normal conversation with them and telling them about what I do down there, and I'm a reporter, and, why'd you guys cross now? And they very, open and candidly said, well, we're crossing now because of the election, and we're, afraid of Donald Trump. And we think that right now we need to come because of, we're under the wire. We need Biden to be in power for any hope for us of getting through, right? And I think that's something that I've seen kind of a theme of thinking about it, is that when you talk to migrants down there, they tend to favor the president who let them into the country, which they view as Biden. And when you talk to them about, well, do you know about Donald Trump and his plans to, carry out this mass deportation in the United States, what do you think about that? And it worries them. And it's not something they like, obviously, but they really are trying to get here now under the wire of the election. And at the same time, the Biden administration is seeing that this is a top issue right now for Americans, that they don't like this issue. They don't like the crisis at the southern border across party lines. And he's trying to put in place some fixes to level things off, to make things slower down there, to get Mexico to work with them. But, a lot of people see through it, and 3.5 years later, they think it's, too little, too late. So you have Americans who are very upset about this, and then you have the migrants who are trying to get through before things get stricter in their view under a Trump administration.
Yeah, it's really an incredible moment, just like you said. The politics of it, obviously, first and foremost for us, the national security issues attached to it. You do such great work. Everybody, first of all, be sure to subscribe and share to this podcast. This was so powerful and so revealing. And Jennie Taer, you do such extraordinary firsthand work there at the border and really bring these issues to light, because all Americans need to care about it and care about what's your homeland. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And everybody, I'll be back soon with another great edition of Protecting America. And of course, you can catch me every weeknight, 10 p.m. to midnight on the legendary WABC Radio. This is Rita Cosby, and thanks for all you do to protect America.
Support American-made, tariff-free clothing with American Giant. They aren't affected by tariffs because their clothing products never left the U.S. Get 20% off your first order when you use promo code STAPLE20 at American-Giant.com.